Should I try and knock myself
No.
out with a strange death?
Yeah.
This is the answer to when Diamond's asking you what's your vision for your lineup and what's your criteria for the books you choose. Can I knock someone out with them?
All right.
Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line.
We have a special guest today, a artist who has their debut graphic novel coming out in English very, very soon, which you can pre-order now. Miel Vandepitte, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah. Speaking of very soon, how soon is it actually? I don't know the dates.
That's a very good question. Yeah, so the official release date is supposedly the first week of March, but
right.
it might actually make it into comic stores a couple weeks before that, because basically I'll be sending the printer the final numbers and the final files like the third day of January, and then from there it'll be 6 or 7 weeks. From there. So we have a Kickstarter campaign right now for people to pre-order it if they want to pre-order it through Living the Line, and they can get copies that are signed by Miel that have a special book plate and little things like that we can include, and those will ship out about 2 weeks before it's available in comic stores. You can also pre-order it from any comic store that's affiliated with Diamond Comics, and it'll also come out through bookstores as well a couple weeks after that. So each of these things are just slightly staggered after each other. So the name of the book is Centralia. I have been corrected by people who live in Pennsylvania. Centralia.
Okay, I should probably know this. Centralia.
Centralia. Okay.
So Miel, as I just alluded to right there, Centralia, the name Centralia is the name of a real town in Pennsylvania. So how did you, a Flemish artist, encounter Centralia?
The first time I heard about it was on a podcast called The Dollop, which is hosted by Dave Anthony and Garrett Reynolds, two comedians. They're also American, and they talk about bizarre stories from American history. And Centralia was certainly one of those bizarre stories that I thought no one would know. At least in Belgium, no one knows it. So I thought I'll just take some of this and make it my own. And the city that is the setting for my story it's a bit different. It's completely different actually from the real town, but I kept the name as a little Easter egg, I guess, that I didn't expect anyone to know. But since it's being translated now, I guess more people will be familiar with the real story. I probably should have thought of that. But yeah, it will be interesting to see what people think who actually have been there. I've never been there. I don't know that much about it. What I do know is that the Centralia, the real town, also inspired Silent Hill and several other interesting properties. So I'm not the first to take inspiration from it.
Yeah, and so we should say the real town was a small town in Pennsylvania that was a coal town. So all the people that lived in there worked at this coal mine, and essentially they had what it's an early environmental disaster where someone set off a fire to burn some refuse or something inside of the coal mine, and it just underground, out of control fire forever. And this place is just turned into a hellhole. And there's still a few people that live in this place like 50 years later, and there's a fire service because the government is legally obligated to provide them with a fire truck or whatever, but there's like 5 people that live in this town. And so our friend cartoonist Jimmy Gownley, I was talking to him about this book, and I sent him the book, and he was super enthusiastic about the book, and then he was like, so have you been there? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I taught my daughters to drive in Centralia because nobody's there and the streets are all
wow.
So and so the fact of this sort of hellish environmental disaster, that was sort of the seed for your idea for the book. Is that right?
Yeah, it just got me thinking, because this happened to a relatively small town, but imagine how it would look like if this had happened to like a huge city,
right?
And all of that would be abandoned. Yeah. Yeah, I started thinking about how that could look like, and it was very visually interesting to me. and it's looked like a great kickoff point for a story.
Right.
These
And
are the
so
first few pages.
the beginning of the story there, the first couple pages that we're seeing, we see people and basically entering the town and getting close enough that they can feel the heat coming from it, but you know they are melted away by the heat of the road, in a rather gruesome sequence there. And
Well, and when you said that Jimmy was taking his daughter to drive there, like this is my only experience with the concept. And so I'm like, wait, is like the ground still like hot there? I mean, it's obviously not melting the car tires, but is it?
No, you can't live there because there's noxious fumes and things like that. But it's not going to kill you
Okay.
now. But it's not inhabitable, you know, except for the people that still want to live there.
Humans will make do.
Right. And you know, the people in the book Centralia make do as well. So you have these adventurers who are coming into a new town, this town in search of a sort of legendary treasure, and in hopes of, you know, getting economic reclamation. Like they're having economic problems and they want this to solve their thing. But they find the inhabitants of the town, which have managed to survive this sort of hellish thing, and they, you know, it seems to me like you've done the sort of classic thing of a fantastic cartoonist finding a fantastic concept, which you've given yourself permission to draw the things that you wanted to draw, right? I mean,
yeah. In my version of the story, those fumes, they of course turned the inhabitants into mutants. So then I got to draw mutants. So I just use it as an excuse to draw whatever I wanted, really.
I wish
right
I
about
had
that.
one of those mutant pages, because that was like one of the things that I immediately, while reading this and looking through this book, is like, I just want to be inside your head.
Okay.
Like it's got it. Like what's going on in there? Like is this stuff all clearly visual for you?
In what way is it visual?
Like when you,
I mean,
like,
I
are
just
these
start
characters,
sketching.
do
Yeah,
they
it's
exist
not.
visually in your head, or do they come out on the paper?
I think they come out on the paper. I'm not very good at imagining people in my head. I think personally, I think that's one of my weak points, drawing characters. So that's why I chose the mutants. They don't have to look exactly right. They can be a bit shaped in a different way. But I just make a lot of sketches, and then in the end, the most interesting one become the characters.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems to me that this is a strategy that Carson and I have talked about a lot on the channel. Is that that when you're writing for yourself, you can make something that exists in your own wheelhouse, you know. And so, if I was analyzing this by your skill set by looking at the book, I would say that the things that you're very interested in are bizarre figures, bizarre landscapes, and architecture. And sort of a texture of life, you know, design motifs and things like that. So, I mean, do you have an architectural background? Do you have like a, you know, where does the architectural aspect come from? Because you have some insane layouts in this book.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a background in architecture. I have a few engineers in the family. Maybe that plays a role a little bit, although I'm not sure. Yeah, I just realized, I think while learning to draw, while practicing, I gravitated towards drawing building things, because they don't move when you draw them. People, they run away, and it's hard to get a good drawing of a human while they are doing something. And with a building, you can take your time and really look at it and study it. So I made a lot more progress in drawing buildings and practicing that than in drawing anything else. And I liked it. And perspective comes relatively easy to me. And I noticed that other people struggle with it. So I thought, well, I have to use this to my advantage. And I also like the idea of comics being unfilmable. You know, if this story had been a movie, it would have required a huge budget. So I like that. That's in that way I can do something that would be difficult to film or to present in any other medium. That's why I like involving the big cityscapes and buildings and the destruction and all of that.
Right. And there's no shortage of any of those things. Yeah, and you're exactly right. Like if you had written these things into a film script, I mean, that somebody would just take their red pen and slash it all up and be like, that's going to cost our entire budget to get this 15-second shot, but you can go ahead and draw it, and all it costs you is 2 days of labor, right?
Yeah, or more than that sometimes. But you're right about that.
So where speaking of labor, you have a fairly interesting work situation. Will you tell us a little bit about the place that you drew this book at and where you're living now?
It started as a school project. I was studying in Brussels. We have in all of Flanders, we have one school where you can learn comic book design. This is Lucas School of Arts. So naturally, I went there, and this book started as my thesis project, I guess, in the final year of that program. And then I found the publisher, but the book wasn't really finished yet. I wanted to add 40 more pages. And by the time I got to that point, I had been invited to be part of a residency in Brussels. It's called the Mark Sleen Museum. Mark Sleen was a famous Belgian cartoonist who would have turned 100 years old this year, who invented a character called Nero. And yeah, he's quite famous in Belgium, and he has his own little museum. But yeah, the owners of the museum came up with an idea to build a little residency in the middle of the museum. It's called the Yellow Cube. It's a mostly cube-shaped little building that's painted fully yellow. And there is a table and a scanner and a printer. And me and a few other artists get to use it. And we get paid to be there. And in exchange, we also keep an eye on the museum. So we, I guess, part-time museum guards, part-time comic artists. That's a job. But we don't get a lot of visitors, so I have a lot of time to work on the book and things like that.
This needs to be a job in America. Come on, NEA, hook me up.
I agree. I think every museum should do this, especially the ones with not too many visitors. All those museum guards are just there waiting. They're bored. Hire an art student instead who can do something productive at the same time. So I'm a big fan of the concepts. I've been there for a while now.
You're expected to be working.
Well.
You're expected to be doing art while you're sitting there. Like you're not like, absolutely. I imagine here, if a security guard was sitting there doing art, their supervisor would come by and be like, hey, knock it off.
Yeah.
It's a smart concept.
Yeah, but yeah, we are expected. And we also have a little camera above us that is filming what we do. And there's a screen in the window outside that displays what we are working on.
Oh,
it's part of the attraction in a way. And then sometimes people come up and they ask questions. What are you doing? And then we, get to talk to visitors. And sometimes they buy our books, so that's good.
Do they have your books for sale at the museum itself?
Yeah, they had a few copies, but they're sold out now. But we at some point had my books.
Gotcha. And so as of right now, Centralia is only available in Dutch, and it's coming out in English, as we were talking about. Yeah. But as far as other translations of it, you were mentioning before we started filming that are you able to announce the other release as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it will be for sale in 2 months. The French translation will be published by Albin Michel. Okay. They're a quite renowned French publisher. They mainly do regular books, novels, but they also do a few comic books, and they picked up Centralia. I haven't read it yet, and my French isn't great, so I'm not really going to be able to judge if it's any good, but I'm confident that they're doing a good job with it.
Right. Yeah, it was a real pleasure to work on. You know, it was one of those things where I got the heads up on the book from a person who follows our YouTube channel, headed me towards Eric Creek's work, and I went to the Scratch website and just basically got the catalog of Scratch works and saw Centralia. Was immediately taken by some of your imagery, including like the cover image, which shows, you know, essentially somebody like fishing, giving you a little side eye while this total destruction is happening behind him, and we've got all these sort of canted, you know, canted buildings behind him, and you know these reverse silhouette birds in the sky. And you know, the imagery was so striking that when I got the copy in Dutch. I mean, I just read the whole thing through anyway. But actually getting to work on it with you was like super exciting because, like, you know, your story is so, you have all these serious elements of your story, but the tone is very playful at times, and sort of, you know, it seems to me that like there's a lot of opportunity in the presentation of it to be like everything that you want it to be. It doesn't have to be like, it's not locked down to a certain kind of tone. So when you were approaching that, like for the, you know, for the original, like what was your sort of thought process in terms of the writing? Was it always like, what is the next thing that I want to see, that I want to draw? I mean, is your artist self sort of holding the hand of the writer self? I mean, who's in control?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. While making it, one thing that I was often thinking is maybe this is the only chance I'll ever get to make a comic book. So I felt like I had to put in everything, even if it didn't necessarily fit together. So that's why there's a lot of different elements. And while that's the reason that it's sometimes playful, I guess, and at other times not as much, and that there's strange characters, and I've just thrown everything together that I liked in comics myself and tried to make it a bit coherent.
But that was the goal when you went to school and going through your training. Your goal is to do comics.
True, yeah. But at the same time, in Belgium, I write in Dutch, and yeah, we have like maybe 6 million people who read and speak Dutch in Belgium. So the market is very small. So I was realistic about it, that there was a good chance that I would finish my studies, and then that I would have to move on to something else. So that's why I was often thinking maybe this is the only time that I get to do this. And that's the reason that I put in so many different things, mainly for myself, to have fun with it.
Well, it seems like that's kind of scratches your publisher's business model too, in that they help you guys sell it to different markets, and that they are sort of expecting that they will sort of assist the Dutch language books in getting out to, especially like other European publishers and things like that, right?
Yeah, it turns out that's the case. I didn't know in advance, but it's a fun surprise. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a blessing, because I think that it's a bit sad to hear you, but also inspiring to hear you say, like, I just gave it everything I have because this may be all I've got. And it's sad that you have to like labor under that, but it's also inspiring, because one of the things that me and Sean have mentioned many times in talking about is like, wait, this guy was like 19 when he drew some of this. Like, get out of here. This is absurd. Like, it's so, like, it's so accomplished so young. And I think that attitude that you took of like all or nothing, it shows. And man, like, it is impactful because of that.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, it wasn't just all or nothing. It was also about entertaining myself. I thought there's a chance that I'm the only person who's going to get to enjoy this, so I'll entertain myself and put in all these weird characters that just randomly make an appearance, and then
I was trying to describe to our distributor what books that, you know, Living the Line publishers have in common with each other, because, you know, that's been a question that's come up a couple different times, and people look at some of these books together and they're like, well, this is, you know, what is it that I'm expecting to see? And I was laughing about it, and I told her that I thought that if something is so strong but so idiosyncratic that someone is going to love it so passionately, and you can equally imagine the person that's going to hate it at the same time, then that's the thing that's the most exciting for me, is because like when something is so much itself, you got to have to expect that some people are like irritated by it, right? And it's been entertaining to sort of see some of the early reviews roll in, because I always sort of keep that in the back of my head, that like the best things have that really outsized positive reaction, but also the really outsized negative reaction too.
Yeah, they're divisive. And I think that goes for this book as well. I've also been keeping track of the reviews, and there's not many 3-star reviews. It's either 5-star or 1-star.
Yeah.
And I kind of enjoy that.
It's perfect. That's what you want. I noticed when we were at the very beginning, when Sean was explaining the story of Centralia, he was sharing some of the reviews with me because we just enjoy looking at those. Like, I don't know. I think some people get really caught up in that, but I think we're pretty like just objectively entertained by it. And what I think the thing that we were both very entertained by, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on it, is there seemed to be, as people in America reviewing it, some like political pushback on like, how dare you steal the story of
No.
this town that's going through this like terrible thing, and you're just like appropriating that and turning it into stupid sci-fi story. And we both thought that was just such a, like, your book is so far divorced from that. It's like the smallest kernel of an idea, that we thought that was an absurd response. But I'm curious, like, if you've seen those, or if not, what you think about that.
I've seen one of those, I think. Yeah. Someone who was disappointed that it wasn't nonfiction.
Right.
But if she would have read the back of the book, I think she would have realized that it was not going to be nonfiction.
Or flip through the pictures.
Looked at the cover.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I like that it's, at least it makes an impression. That's that's
Yeah.
positive, I think. But yeah, I did think that maybe I should have changed the name of the town, and then no one would have noticed. But because of the name, I get that some people will have that comment that I misused something historical or something like that. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's something delightfully international about you know, sort of borrowing and taking from different places and sort of synthesizing and seeing what happens when you make something like that. You know, Carson and I have often talked about, one of my favorite examples of that is a very interesting manga that was made in the early 70s by Moto Hagio that is called Heart of Thomas, and it's a book made by a Japanese woman in her 20s about two preteen German boys living in a German boys' house in the 1920s. It's like, but it's like fictional Germany. You know what I mean? It's not. It's not real. And similarly, like, you know, you have like someone like Franz Kafka wrote a book about America without ever having been to America. And in some ways, it's like the most surreal Kafka you can get, because he's projecting himself upon the sort of canvas of imaginary America. You know, do you kind of relate to that at all in terms of how you sort of picked and choose the things that you use? I mean, was it just solely about entertaining yourself, or is it just like some of it, it's like, it'd be really nice to draw a really nice Stetson hat?
Yeah, the real inspiration, or one of the inspirations, was that I used to play a cowboy game online. So that's why I had a bit of affinity for that aesthetic, I guess. My alter ego in the game was Jack Stonehand. He's now a character in the book. That's why he looks a little bit like me. So that was just it. I read a lot of Karl May as well as a kid. That's
What was his
Western
name?
stories by Karl May, Old Shatterhand with it too.
Oh, okay.
The old books by a German writer on cowboys and Native Americans and all of that. I don't know if he ever visited the US really, but I kind of like those wild interpretations, like the one you talked about from the manga.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see one culture through the eyes of another one. Like those Chinese fighting movies with, I don't know if that rings a bell, but what's it called? Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, something like that.
Yeah.
Those kind of movies, I think they're Americanized versions of the real Chinese culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like those aesthetics a lot. So I think it's a good thing that a bit of that is going on in my book as well.
Do you have a sense of why the Western genre is so popular in the European market? Because I see so many Westerns coming out of there, and then like no one in the United States is doing Westerns, and that's curious to me because it is an American thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because it's exotic to us.
Yeah.
I think you guys would have a lot of medieval fantasy books, and
Yep.
that's more European. So I think, yeah, it's the exotic nature of the genre. To us, that's exotic, the Western, and to you guys, the medieval genre is exotic.
There's not a lot of medieval genre books set in America for some strange reason.
How would that play out? But it's always also like, and I really like your work really has that strong, I don't know. I mean, it's like a scene like this is so linked to the European scene to me, and so linked especially to Moebius and his love for the desert. And that seems to be a big part of that exotic. This is the exotic environment of the desert. And I've always thought deserts are so ugly and like colorless and sand colored and uninteresting. And when people like you or Moebius or someone come along and you see them as these beautiful alien, like fascinating landscapes, it's always like, oh yeah, okay, I guess that is the thing people can like.
Yeah, for us, that's an attraction. A desert, or really anything where, any place where you can look in the distance.
Right.
I mean, in Belgium, everything is so close to each other. You can never see farther than 500 meters or something. And then in the desert, there's nothing for such a long distance. And I guess that speaks to us because we don't really have it in Europe. But I've also noticed that there's a crazy amount of French and European Western being made. There's really a lot of it. I don't have an explanation for it, except for that it's exotic.
Sure, and just like the medieval setting, I think it provides a framework for a fictional universe where you have conflict between the ungoverned and the formation of governed. Like you know, it provides like a lot of different opportunities for stories about like lawlessness and wildness and the conflict of that between the centering that happens with people forming bonds and forming governments. And you know, like the medieval time, you have the combination. You don't just have the king in the castle, you also have the bandits outside, you know.
Yeah.
You get the sort of conflicts are built into the location in a certain kind of way.
It's an amazing sandbox to play in. There are so many elements that you can use. Yeah, I agree with that.
What are some of the elements? Like if I say, okay, here's the elements of art, I can say line, shape. Like can you make explicit some of the elements that you think are available to a writer in a Western that you find particularly compelling?
I don't know if I've read enough Western comics, but I've read a lot of Western books as a child, the Karl May books. And every book has a scene where someone is has to go, I don't know how to say that, but listen to a conversation, and they have to get into a camp without being seen and without leaving a trail, and extract this information. Every book has a scene like that, at least one. And then there's horse chases and shootouts and things like that can be done over and over again and will always be interesting. So there's these few set elements that you can use to your advantage because people have, I guess, know them a bit, and it has affinity.
And then you've combined it with the sci-fi kind of elements as well, like the tropes of sci-fi, and that's where I think it really levels up into something like special and new. And it's not like the Star Wars, The Mandalorian, which is like a cowboy story in a space opera. This is a very different kind of more grounded what if sci-fi.
It actually makes a little bit of a difficult choice as a publisher because I have a deep resentment of like movie trailers that show the entire movie in 2 minutes or something like that. And so, you know, with this book in particular, like because once they get into the city, everything goes nuts, right? And your drawing goes along with that. Like you just like, okay, I got to do this, I got to do that, you know. But on the other hand, like I'm reluctant to show some of those things because I feel like I want somebody to, you know, come to the
me to show it.
I feel like I want somebody to come to the book and be surprised by what happens and have the same kind of journey. So it's a little bit of a frustrating kind of thing, because like I feel like I want to be like, you know, just sit here with Carson and like thumb through the entire thing and be like, look at this, you know. Do you feel like had you plotted out the entire thing, or were you developing the concept still as you're producing pages?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I did have the storyboards, but then while working on it, a lot of things changed, and I reworked the storyboards multiple times. I'm not very good at planning, I've noticed. So a lot of it went out of the window and got replaced. And as I said, the book was unfinished when I graduated, and I added 40 pages later, but they were not pages at the end. It was in the middle that I inserted little scenes and things like that.
Okay.
So it was a bit chaotic how it all came together. But I agree with your sentiments that you don't want to spoil the book, so to say. I would like to put everything on my Instagram and get a lot of likes, but there's a few of those big spreads that I still haven't put online, because then people will know that a certain thing will happen in the story.
Yeah.
Although I'll end up doing it eventually.
So I'm curious. You're talking. You mentioned a couple times that this started as a project for school. I would be curious to hear a little bit more, because you said that was a school specifically for people who want to be comic artists. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the structure of what that education was like, because that's, I'm assuming, different than like a standard art program. And then also, like, what were the parameters on that final project? Because this is a big book, and you say I added 40 pages, but that's still a lot. So that's an intense final project.
92.
92.
Okay.
Yeah, I had 92 pages in the end. Yeah, it wasn't what I expected, the school for comic arts. I was expecting classes in penciling, inking, digital coloring. There was none of that really. It wasn't traditional at all. They encouraged us to make small publications, to make scenes, to experiment with to just experiment with everything. At one point, one of my teachers told me that I was not allowed to use black in my drawings for 2 months, because I wanted to make traditional comics, so I was inking all the time. I wasn't allowed to do it for 2 months.
Wow.
So I think they're more of a classical art school, and they really push you to be experimental. And the parameters for that final project, I don't think there were any. It just had to contain images and tell a story, and that's the name of the education: graphical storytelling or graphic storytelling. It didn't have to be a comic book. There were people who made children's books. One guy who just made 7 big drawings with the same characters every time. I don't think they had a story, but he graduated as well. There was one girl in the year below me, and I believe she built a maquette of some kind. She wanted to, at first she was going to build a tiny house or something in the schoolyards, but it ended up being a maquette, a small representation of how it would have looked. And she also just passed or graduated. So it's very much open to interpretation what a graphical storytelling means in that school.
Interesting.
Did you have you must have had some kind of technical background in terms of, just in terms of your figure drawing. Like, you were kind of poo-pooing your figure drawing a little bit, but you keep these characters rigidly consistent throughout the book, you know, like you're adhering to the design. So where do you even get that as a concept? Like, when's the first time you thought, like, oh, Asterix always looks like this, and when he turns this direction, he always looks like that? That's obviously like important to you and foundational to your cartooning. So where does that come from?
Well, we did have a lot of figure drawing every week, so I guess that came naturally from that. And we did practice drawing characters a lot. And to me personally, I think it's important to have a consistent style in a book, to make it feel like it's coherent and connected. So that's something I paid a lot of attention to. But I didn't really go out of my way to practice that. I didn't make character sheets for the characters or anything like that. I probably should have.
When were you taught linear perspective, since you say you responded so well to that, and since the book is full of I mean, it's full of everything that we showed at the beginning is just the desert scenes, but I want to make sure people see
Yeah.
some of the intense cityscapes.
In this page, all the 3 drawings have the same perspective grids, so you can connect all the lines.
Yeah,
That
and
was a
that's why I
little
love
Easter
this
egg for
one,
myself.
because they like move across it, but they're not the same cityscape either, right? Like this
Yeah.
is not the roof of that building, so there's like a weird trick here where you tricked into thinking it's all one thing, but it's not, that I quite love. So you're very, very playful with perspective from a compositional standpoint. So I'm curious, like, when were you exposed to it? What was that first experience with perspective? How have you
Yeah.
developed those skills?
For the first time, I think I bought some drawing books as a kid that like these typical drawings books, like titled "This is how you draw anime girls" or something like that. But some of those had
Yeah.
1 page about perspective, just quickly explaining 2-point and 3-point perspective, and that's all you need really. As long as you know how to use a grid, then you're set, I think. But we did have one teacher who paid a lot of attention to, or invested a lot of time into having us learn a lot of rules about perspective. We had a few exercises where we had to make a map and then put a viewpoint in the map and draw perspective views from that point on the map.
Yeah.
And it had to match perfectly. Most people hated that exercise, and it was a bit boring, but it was very useful to do things like that, I think.
Yeah, as an instructor who teaches basic drawing and has to deal with perspective, I see that. Like I'll assign a similar, what I do is I just have them make a blueprint of a room from the top, and then I basically just make them draw it, like, okay, now draw that as if the wall's been taken off of one of the walls and you're in front of it, which is pretty simple in terms of placing on a map. But yeah, watching people try and work their way through that, to me and you, it's like, oh yeah, it makes so much sense. Obviously, it goes back to the vanishing point, but watching people struggle with that. But your work shows why, if you get it, you have like the power of God.
Thank you. I feel very powerful now.
Yeah. I mean, you do, though. You've created, you can create a whole world and put yourself anywhere within it consistently, and that is
I think it's so frustrating for some people because they think that they understand space because they work through space all day. You know, you walk through space all day. You made a very interesting observation when you said that about not being able to see very far where you live. If you live in a city, you don't have that that unforgiving, unlimited, long view like that. So anytime you put a human being in a situation where you're asking them to take something that they think they understand intuitively because they do it, and then you're asking them to dissect it in a way that rubs in their face that they don't understand it at all.
Yeah.
I think it's like a recipe for frustration, especially somebody who already thinks of themselves as an artist, and they're just like, but
Yeah, that's typical. Sometimes you think that you know how something works. Like I use this markers all the time, but I don't know how it happens that there's ink coming out of it. I really understand this thing, but it works, so fine. But yeah, it's the same thing with perspective, I think. And you just said something interesting about not being able to see very far.
Yeah.
I always thought that atmospherical perspective was just a trick that people used. But then when I went to the US for the first time, then I actually saw it, and it actually exists. So that was a big revelation for me. It's not just a trick, it's real.
You look at the landscape painters, and there's a reason that somebody like, basically the New World is the thing that made people really, anyway, yeah.
Well, I just went and looked at Albert Bierstadt. There's an Albert Bierstadt at the Birmingham Museum of Art where I take my students every semester, and that's peak landscape painting, right? And it's Yosemite. He's in the American West in Yosemite, so yeah, of course. But Miel, also when you said that the thing about being able to see far, you made clear to me how spiritual the horizon line is. I didn't get that, but now I understand Moebius better too, because what a crazy thing. I'm so used to thinking about being able to see that, but if you've never seen where the earth meets the sky before, I can't imagine.
Yeah, Well, we have the sea, so you can see the horizon at the sea, and that's something. But I've never seen it on land, and yeah, that's why it's special to us, I think.
When you have to go there, like here, I mean, I can kind of see the horizon just driving to work.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah,
atmospheric perspective, the hills in the back, like that's just part of my, because I go to work on a very straight road and it starts a little bit higher up and it goes lower, so I have a clear view to the hills on the horizon line with the atmospheric
Wow.
perspective and all that, and I just ignore it every day, and now I'm going to be driving to work like blessed.
I remember meeting somebody in a hostel in Italy, and I had been there with my wife for 3 months at the time, and we were getting ready to go back, and I was saying how weird it was going to be in a place that didn't have everything be old again. Because we had been for 3 months, we'd been in a place, and I was like looking around me, and it's like, okay, how many people have been murdered on this sidewalk, or how many people have fallen in love under this statue? Everything has this age to it. The human construction has all this age to it. And then I was telling this to this person who worked at the hostel, and she started laughing, and she's like, "You don't want to be where something's young? Everything's young. It's so spacious and everything." She was like trying to give me the pep talk, the American pep talk. Like, here's this continent where it's so funny that you guys think that building is old. It's 200 years old. It's so funny that you think that that's old.
Yeah, but at least you have air conditioning everywhere, and there's a lot of advantages, I think, to having newer buildings and a newer environment. A less confusing city plan is one of them. I always get lost, and that doesn't happen in the US very easily. So.
Right. Yeah, because especially when you get the older the city, the less likely it is to be on a grid, and it can especially be confusing, like for an American being in like Rome or something, where you're in one of the gridded areas of the city that was built by the Romans or something, and then you wander into a street that's slowly turning the entire time, and then you realize like, oh, I what's happened, and it's like you're in the older part of the city, and you've just made a circle.
Yeah,
you can't see
exactly.
anything because it's just I feel like I'd be interested to see what your next project is, and sort of how are you planning on playing to your strengths in a similar kind of way, or playing to your interests in a similar kind of way? Like what's the status on the new one?
I'm working on a new book. I have about 40 pages done in black and white. It again focuses on a big city, but it's completely different from the last one. It's very futuristic, a bit cyberpunk-esque even. And it's about a famous criminal who shows up every 5 years for one day, and then he's gone again. And this time people will try to catch him. And there's a young, ambitious police agent, and he's going to be the one to catch him. And it's a big futuristic city. So there's, again, lots of cityscapes. And also part of the world is that some of the leaders and rich people have decided that they want to preserve a few old buildings. So they've just dug them up from their original place and put them on top of skyscrapers. So you have old monuments on top of skyscrapers. And at the beginning, that was just a little detail because I wanted to draw that, but now I've changed the story so that it plays a role in the story, and it's actually relevant to the plot.
Have you lived anywhere where there's a real collision of old buildings and new buildings?
Well, Amsterdam is a pretty. I mean, I know
well, just because when I lived in Berlin for 2 months, and in Berlin, because you have the bombing, you will have like this one little building that is super old, and it's surrounded, like it's like this big, like little slice of old brick building, and it's surrounded by new modern buildings. But that seems like the potential for that in Europe is greater than
yeah,
here.
absolutely. Yeah, another example of that is Rotterdam. It's, I believe, the second biggest city in the Netherlands. A lot of it was also bombed, and when they rebuilt it, they clearly had a vision of some kind to be the most modern city in the Netherlands. They have these weird cube-shaped buildings, and then right beside that you have an old church of some kind. So that's one of those cities with a really interesting combination of the old and the new. Ghent doesn't have that as much. This is just an old city.
And you've decided to just go ahead and put it on top of the buildings instead of next to it, which is like the next crazy logical step in that process, which is hilarious. As you're working on the new book, you were saying that on the original book, you were working under this pressure, or I don't know, you were working under this, like, this may be the only one I do. Well, now you're working on your second one. So do you feel less pressure to like put everything in, or how is that, like, okay, I get to do another one, changing the process?
There is a bit more pressure now because now I know people will read it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of what was good in the first one and what could be improved, and how do I preserve the things that worked. So I think a lot about those questions, but in the end, I'm just going to do what I want to do, and that was in this case putting old monuments on skyscrapers. So I just went ahead and did it.
And that's what was successful about the first one, right? Is you just did it for yourself, and then people are responding to it. So like you have to preserve that.
Yeah. I remember when you and I first talked, Miel, we both had a little laugh about one of the Dutch language reviews of the book, where somebody, almost the entirety of their review was them being irritated that you made a side joke on a map. Because there's a map of the location that they're in at a certain part, and you hand lettered in there. One location was named Spaghettisburg. So it's just a silly pun on Gettysburg, but Spaghettisburg. And this person's like basic reaction to it was like, no, like, you can't do that. And it's just it's just so funny because like it seems like the wrong type of a different type of person would be deflated by a comment like that, but like it seems like you're fairly like even keel. We're all sort of on the same page that it's like people just react the way that they react to, and that's
well, if that's the biggest problem with the book, that little joke, then I'm doing good. that was my way of looking at it.
And it's a funny joke. Like, it's a good joke.
Well, I don't know, because I don't know anything about Gettysburg, but the name just came to mind, and I thought, oh, that's a good pun. But I don't know anything about Gettysburg. Maybe it's offensive. I don't know.
I don't know. Neither do I. Like it, but it's funny. It's a good pun. Yeah. So I know before you talked about that you have some pages this side, and we haven't dug into that. Can you show some art and talk about your process as well?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I just got back from a gallery in Brussels, and they will from next month forwards be selling my art. So everything I have is the ones that the gallerist didn't pick for the gallery. So just I say that as a disclaimer.
But also, if you want to own some original art from Centralia, then now you know. What gallery is it? Where should they be going? Can you say?
I think it was just called Galerie de la BD or something, which means Gallery of Comics.
Yeah, well,
it's not a very original name, but
if it comes up, if they're listed by the time the Centralia is on Kickstarter, we'll put it on the Kickstarter, and if it's not, I'll send it out on an email list. So hop on the LTL email list, and we'll get it out to you.
Yeah. The site is just gallerybd.com. So yeah. But they did have a lot of nice drawings on the website. You can see that they have drawings from Will Eisner, from Mike Mignola.
Wow.
He had a drawing from what's his name? From Bernie Wrightson that I actually got to see and hold. That was awesome. But yeah, my drawings. So this is one that I had laying around. It's again one of those pages that you showed earlier. I don't know if the quality is any good.
Yeah, the camera's blurring it out a little bit. Is there color on there, or is that just an effect of? Oh, there we go. That looks better.
All hatching, right?
Yeah. There's no color. It's just traditional ink on paper, I guess.
The camera's just making it look kind of blue, and then there was a moment where there was an effect that made his little strap on his shoulder look red, but that was just a camera effect.
So are you doing that all with pen nibs, or?
Yeah. Yeah, I mostly use traditional pen nibs like this one, for example. The brand is Kuretake, I believe, so
Okay.
it's probably a manga pen of some
Mhm.
kind. I do use a few markers sometimes to fill out black areas and to do little cross hatching. But mostly I use the pen. Yeah, I have more drawings, but if the quality is this bad, maybe there's no use in showing them. This is the cover. It's really big. But
Nice.
Oh, it's nice to see like the size and stuff, even if the detail's not resolving
Yeah, that's
100%.
fantastic.
And you get a sense of how the grays are used better. Actually, kind of the blurriness of the camera really gives you a sense of how much you're
establishing
doing with
values.
the gray. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because when you see it in color, that I mean, it's obviously there, but it's not highlighted in the same way. And you drop the color, you colorize the lines a lot.
Right. I was gonna say, so like a lot of your final art, you're subverting certain areas of the black line and turning it into a sepia line, or a coloralized line. So how are you deciding while you're coloring? How are you deciding which of those black areas you're going to subvert? Is it mostly to push back and give it, like you were saying, like an atmospheric, like a distance, a foreground, and middle ground, or?
Yeah, that's mostly it. For example, in this one, yeah, it's the things in the back that have more of a sepia color. What I also do is I overlay a paper-like texture on top of everything, not just the colors, but also on top of the line layers.
Right.
And I don't know if I did it for this page, but because of that, sometimes the ink looks more like ink and not just a flat digital black shape.
Right. And like seeing it zoomed in like that, you can see some of the texture, and you can also see where some of the areas get the colorized subversion. There's probably a better word to use for that, but I'm just thinking about pushing it back. Yeah, so we're looking at the Dutch version here.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
I noticed that I missed a lot of spots. There's still a few black lines in there. Yeah. This one is really old. That's from 2019, this page. So it's been a while.
So, oops. Carson wants to really get in there. What are you doing, Carson? Your mic is off, man.
Oh, sorry.
I was like, what is he doing? He's going crazy.
No, I was clicking on buttons and stuff. Yeah, sorry. No, I've just seen I'm appreciating the fact that you left stuff like this alone, because I've had students recently like doing this on their iPads and like rendering a face and then telling me like, oh, I'm worried that my face is, I haven't got enough detail in there and stuff. And I'm like, you're zoomed in at like 3,000%. Like, so the fact that you're not going in and worrying about, oh, I didn't quite get all of the black, like I find that healthy and refreshing.
Well,
I don't have time for that. It's too many pages to zoom in all the time.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not the fact that you are making the all of the drawing stage as a physical object that exists in the real world gives you already a framework, a limitation, that means that everything that you're sort of applying upon that is already bound within your limitation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly helps to draw on paper. I think I would make the same mistake if I was drawing digitally and zoom in all the time and lose myself in those details that are not going to be noticeable anyway.
Yeah. When, in your process, are you like someone who's going to like lay a page out, pencil it, ink it? Or are you going to lay out the whole book and then pencil the whole book and then ink the whole book? Is there a formula there?
I like inking and coloring the best. So I will get started with inking as soon as possible. Sometimes the pencils aren't even really finished on a page, but I want to ink, so I'll start inking. And then I have to go back and pencil a bit more. So I'm a bit chaotic in that regard. I've never penciled multiple pages and waited to finish them, to ink them. I always do one or two and then I start inking. But I often I do wait to start coloring until I've finished the scene, so that I can give all of those pages similar color palettes,
Okay.
so that they fit together a bit better. But yeah, the closer it gets to the finished stage, the more I like it, the more I enjoy the process. So I go too quick over the penciling, I think, just because I like to look at the finished thing or an almost finished thing.
Yeah, you've got the lust for the results, right? Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. To I mean, why, if you can ink over something that looks half finished in pencil, then why finish it all the way, right? I mean,
Or just start going
of
straight to
course.
ink eventually. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you're drawing the same buildings multiple times, then by the after 10 pages you kind of know how to do it, and you don't need those exact pencil lines. You can just fill in the gaps a little bit. So yeah, I start inking as soon as possible.
You mentioned coloring an entire scene simultaneously. There's a lot of color unity in the book, in the sense that each chunk seemed to have its own sort of palette. Like there's a scene where the female reporter, Lanka, is that her name?
Ace, I believe.
Oh, Ace. I apologize. Sorry, Lanka's. Yeah. Ace gets separated from the rest of the group, and that entire section has this very kind of purpley sort of night feel to it. It's not just because it's night, like the other scenes don't have that same kind of evocation of night. So like in a scene like that, like how are you arriving at the palette for that? Is it just instinctual, like it just feels like a purple scene to you? Like how do you arrive at the colors?
I do the coloring digitally, so I get to try a lot of things. And sometimes I just end up with something that works, and then I use that. I think for the purple one, for that scene in particular, I had a bit of vision in the beginning, but sometimes I just see what happens in Photoshop and I go with it if something works.
Fantastic.
It seems like play. It's just play, fun, and intuition is like the core of what you're doing, which I'm extremely jealous about. Because like you're saying that the finishing is the most fun part. For me, the planning's the most fun. And then it's like, okay, now I just have to make it happen. And you wrapping in the making and the finishing kind of at the same time, I think is allowing you to have fun. And so I'm inspired by that. Steal that process. Cool.
Yeah, the planning, I don't know. I find the planning very difficult because when you start, you have all these ideas and you want it to be the best book. And as soon as you start planning, it becomes a reality. And then it inevitably doesn't meet those initial expectations. So the planning for me is the most frustrating part, I think.
Okay.
And as soon as I've settled on the planning and I can just put in the hours, that's what I enjoy the most.
Fantastic. Well, we should probably wrap it up here because we've been going for an hour here now. But I mean, I hope that you will come back and talk to us at some point about one of your favorite books or something else that you can sort of, bring to us and talk about when we're a little bit closer to the general release for the book, if you're up for it. And like we were talking about, this book is available for pre-order right now. You can get this from Kickstarter. You can get this from your local comic shop. Or you can pick it up from your local bookstore as well. And it's going to be in general release sometime in February is the safe way to put it. So by the end of February or the early March. And we'll have a lot more things coming up related to the book as it gets up a little bit closer. And I'm going to make sure that Carson, that you get a copy straight from the printer so that you can do a little flip through. And,
I won't give away too much. I won't show away all the impressive spreads. That is such a weird equation because I hate how Fantagraphics never shows any pages from the inside of a book, or if they do, they'll show you the least representative pages of a book. Like, so from an advertising standpoint, you always want to show like here's like 2 regular pages and here's like a couple badass like eye candy to get you going, but then like you're giving away the cool shit too. So
yeah,
I get it. I'll have to be careful.
You'll notice that the big spread that I use for talking about Centralia, that is from later in the book, doesn't actually have any plot points depicted in the spread. You see some of the same characters that you see in the early pages, and so that's part of the thought process. But yeah, it's a weird thing, because like you said, like you want to go put all those on Instagram and have all your friends see. But damn it, they need to go buy your book. Scratch has still got copies, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. There's still a few left.
Yeah.
In multiple languages now, so you don't have an excuse to not buy it.
You were going to have all 3 of the official languages of your country covered, right? So
no, we have German as well.
Oh, German.
German is an official language because 3% of Belgians speak German, so it's an official language.
Wow.
On 3% you can get official? Okay. Yeah, Spanish needs to be an official language in the United States.
It probably should be, yeah, but we have too many languages. At one point at school I had Greek and Latin as well, so that's just too much to keep up with, and I'm not very good at languages anyway.
Well, that's interesting. You had Latin. So one last anecdote before we go. One of the things that you and I talked about when we were talking about how we were going to do the text adaptation was these names that you had, which I assume the English names seemed still fairly exotic in Dutch, in terms of how you were using them. But this gave me like an opportunity to test out one of my long-standing theories about translation, which is that you should take something and make it just as exotic in the target location. So like when it comes into English, if you keep all of the sort of pseudo-English names, it doesn't have the same sort of like remove that the mutant characters and everything needed. So like we ended up like with a pseudo-Latin instead, which gives it
a very good call, I think. Good decision.
There's a bit of that asterisk punniness to, like, he does that too, like the Latinizing the names, and I've always been impressed by how those books get translated. And I think, Sean, your translation had some of that same, like, shit, how do I translate a pun type of thing to it, and you pulled it off very well.
Well, we talked about, I remember we emailed about specific ones, like what I mean, didn't I even like ask you like what in the hell does Lanka saying here, like what does this mean? But yeah, I mean, you've got jokes throughout it, like some of which are Dutch jokes and some of which are like referencing like Dutch idioms and things like that. So it was fun to sort of like tease out like, what is it? How do you represent this thing so that somebody reading it English is having the same or similar experience to the person reading it in the, Dutch? Which is all to say, we need to get a German edition so that everyone that has no excuse whatsoever.
Yeah.
And also the words will be that long to get the pun instead of just that long.
Each of the balloons will be like this big. Well, you'll save a little space because all the puns will be combined into a single word instead.
Yeah, that's true. It'll be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, it would be awesome to see. But I'm already really glad with the English translation. So thanks a lot for, I guess, taking the chance, to translate this book and to publish it in the US. I hope it does well for you and for me as well. But I'm really excited to see how it all goes.
Well, it's a fantastic book, and it's also a fantastic debut, and I hope it is the first book of many, many books, and I hope people will be getting very, very used to your name in the next 10, 20, 30 years. If we're all still making comics in 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
So cross our fingers.
We'll see.
All right.
Yeah, me too.
It was great to talk to you, Miel, and thank you very much for watching, everyone, and go out and buy Centralia. And once you're done with that, take your copy and drive to Pennsylvania and just leave it at the fire station.
He's so rude. Oh, shit. Yeah, do that.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.